I married a monster to escape my family, but the real monster was the lie that brought us together. Lena Whitmore stood at the altar in a dress borrowed from a woman who pitied her, about to marry a man the town called cursed. They said Caleb Rourke was disfigured, violent, dangerous, a hermit who'd kill her within a month. Her family said it was her only option. His family said she was dying, that this was charity. Two strangers, two lies, one impossible arrangement. What happened next on that frozen mountain changed everything we thought we knew about survival, love, and what it means to be truly seen. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit that like button and stay until the end, because what Lena and Caleb discover about each other will absolutely shatter you. The morning of her wedding, Lena Whitmore woke to the sound of her mother crying in the kitchen. Not the soft, dignified tears Eleanor Whitmore usually permitted herself, the kind she dabbed away with embroidered handkerchiefs at funerals and charity luncheons. These were raw, gasping sobs that carried through the thin walls of their Hartford home like an accusation. Lena lay still in her narrow bed, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that had always reminded her of a bird in flight. She'd spent 31 years in this room, 31 years watching that bird, imagining it could carry her somewhere else. Today, it finally would. Just not the way she'd dreamed. "This is a mistake, Robert. A horrible mistake." Her mother's voice cracked. We can't sell her like livestock. Lower your voice." Her father's response was steel wrapped in silk. Robert Whitmore had built his reputation on control. In business, in society, in his household. "The arrangement is made. The Rourkes are expecting her on the afternoon train." "But she's our daughter." "She's 31 years old, Eleanor. Unmarried, no prospects, no skills. The Henderson engagement destroyed any chance she had at a decent match." A pause, heavy with unspoken blame. "This way she'll at least be provided for. The Rourkes are paying handsomely." Lena closed her eyes. Paying handsomely. Of course they were, because who would take damaged goods for free? The Henderson engagement. 3 years gone, and it still defined her existence like a scar that wouldn't fade. Thomas Henderson had courted her for 6 months. Flowers, poetry, promises whispered in her father's garden. Then he'd met Catherine Lowell at a summer gala, with her golden hair and trust fund and untarnished reputation. The engagement ended. The gossip didn't. Poor Lena Whitmore. What did she do to drive him away? Must have been something wrong with her, something off. 31 and still unmarried. It's unnatural, really. The whispers followed her everywhere. At church socials, where other women's daughters showed off engagement rings while Lena arranged flowers in the corner. At market, where merchants' eyes slid past her like she was already invisible. At family dinners, where her 2 younger sisters, both married, both mothers, exchanged pitying glances across the table. She'd become a ghost in her own life. Present, but not seen. Breathing, but not alive. Until 3 weeks ago, when her father had called her into his study. "I've made an arrangement," he'd said, not looking at her. "A marriage arrangement, with a family in Colorado Territory. You'll leave at the end of the month." Lena had stood there, numb. "I don't understand." "The Rourke family has a son. He's isolated. They're looking for a suitable wife. I've negotiated terms that benefit both parties." "You've negotiated," the word stuck in her throat. "Like a business transaction?" "Don't be dramatic, Lena. All marriages are transactions of a sort. This one happens to be more honest about it." He'd finally met her eyes then, and what she saw there was worse than anger. It was relief. "You'll be taken care of. That's more than you have here." "More than you deserve," his expression said. "More than anyone else would offer." Now, listening to her mother sob and her father's cold dismissal, Lena felt something harden in her chest. Not quite acceptance, not quite defiance. Something in between. A recognition that this was simply what her life had become. A problem to be solved. A burden to be lifted. A daughter to be paid for. She rose and dressed in the only nice dress she owned, pale blue cotton that had been fashionable 5 years ago. Her hands didn't shake as she pinned up her dark hair. They'd stopped shaking after the first week, once she'd realized that fighting wouldn't change anything. The Whitmores didn't fight. They endured. They presented perfect facades and buried their failures in acceptable arrangements. And Lena had become their greatest failure. The tights. 1,500 miles west, Caleb Rourke stood in the barn behind his cabin, methodically sharpening an axe. The rhythmic scrape of whetstone against steel was meditative, predictable, unlike everything else in his life over the past month. "You don't have to do this, son." Caleb didn't turn. He knew his father's voice, knew the particular tone that meant Duncan Rourke was about to deliver one of his careful speeches, the kind that sounded like concern but was really just another form of control. "The arrangement is made," Caleb said quietly. "Train arrives at 4. Arrangements can be unmade." Duncan stepped into the barn, his expensive boots collecting hay dust. Even here, 2 miles up a mountain trail, his father dressed like the mining magnate he was. "If you're having second thoughts, I'm not." "She's dying, Caleb." Duncan's voice softened with practiced sympathy. "Consumption, the family says. She might last a year, maybe less." Caleb set down the axe and finally looked at his father. Duncan Rourke at 55 was still handsome, still commanding, still capable of making people believe whatever he needed them to believe. It was a gift that had built an empire. It was also a curse that had destroyed their family. "Then she'll have a year of peace," Caleb said. "That's more than most people get. You'd saddle yourself with a dying woman out of, what, charity? Maybe I just want to be left alone." Caleb picked up the axe again, testing its edge. "A dying woman won't expect much. Won't demand I come down from this mountain. Won't try to change things." It wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough to satisfy his father. Duncan had never understood Caleb's need for isolation, his deliberate retreat from the world their family inhabited. To Duncan, the mountain cabin was a phase, a temporary rebellion that a proper marriage would cure. He didn't understand that Caleb had chosen this mountain the way a wounded animal chooses a den, as a place to heal, or at least to stop bleeding. "The family assured me she's docile," Duncan said carefully. "Well-bred. She won't be any trouble." Caleb almost laughed. Docile. They were sending him a woman in a box, already half dead, and calling it a blessing. But he'd agreed to it, had signed the papers his father brought, had accepted the arrangement with the same quiet resignation that defined most of his choices now. Because the alternative was worse, facing the endless parade of suitable women his mother would send, each one arriving with hope in her eyes and pity in her smile. Poor Caleb Rourke. So handsome, but so troubled. What happened to him in the war? Nobody quite knows. His father says he just needs the right woman, someone gentle, someone patient. They didn't understand that he didn't need fixing. He needed to be left the hell alone. A dying woman would do that. A dying woman wouldn't ask questions, wouldn't push, wouldn't try to draw him back into a world he'd already left behind. "The cabin's ready?" Duncan asked. "It's ready. Supplies? Enough for winter. And you know how to care for someone in her condition?" Caleb's jaw tightened. "I'll manage." He'd managed worse. The trenches outside Petersburg, the field hospital at Appomattox, the screaming nights after he came home, when sleep meant reliving every moment he'd spent trying to hold dying men together with bare hands and prayers that went unanswered. Caring for a dying woman would be simple by comparison, clinical, distant. He could do distant. "The train arrives at 4, Duncan repeated, as if Caleb might have forgotten in the last 2 minutes. "I'll accompany her up the mountain, make introductions, then I'll leave you both to adjust." "Fine." "Caleb." His father's voice shifted, taking on that weighted quality that meant he was about to say something he considered important. "I know this isn't what you wanted, but it's a good solution. For everyone. The Whitmore girl gets security in her final days, you get peace, and your mother stops worrying that you'll die alone up here." The Whitmore girl. Not a name. Not a person. Just another transaction in Duncan Rourke's world of deals and arrangements. Caleb wondered briefly what she looked like, this dying woman. Whether she was afraid. Whether she'd fought the arrangement or accepted it with the same weary resignation he had. Then he pushed the thought away. It didn't matter. In a year, maybe less, she'd be gone, and he'd be alone again. That was the deal. That was the whole point. Close. The train ride from Hartford to Denver took 4 days. Lena spent most of it staring out the window, watching the landscape transform from familiar New England hills to endless prairie to the sudden, shocking rise of mountains against the western sky. Her mother had accompanied her as far as the station, pressing a small bag into her hands with shaking fingers. Some things for your wedding night. Eleanor couldn't meet her eyes. And your grandmother's locket. You should have something of ours. Now you care, Lena had thought. Now that I'm leaving. But she'd taken the bag and the locket because what else was there to do? Her father hadn't come to the station at all. He'd said goodbye in his study the night before. A brief handshake, a gruff, "Be well, daughter," and a sealed letter that he'd instructed her to give to Duncan Rourke upon arrival. She'd burned the letter in her room that night, watching her father's neat handwriting curl and blacken in the fireplace. She didn't know what it said, and she didn't care. Whatever promises or terms he'd negotiated, they had nothing to do with her. She was just the commodity being delivered. On the train, she sat alone. The other passengers gave her curious glances. A woman traveling without a chaperone was unusual enough to warrant attention. But Lena had perfected the art of looking just respectable enough to discourage conversation. She kept her eyes on the window, her hands folded in her lap, her expression carefully neutral. Inside, she was screaming, but outside she was exactly what her family had taught her to be. Quiet, contained, acceptable. The mountains grew larger each day. By the fourth morning, they dominated the entire western horizon, massive, snow-capped, utterly indifferent to human concerns. Lena found them terrifying and beautiful in equal measure. She'd read about the Colorado Territory in her father's library. Mining towns sprouting up overnight, fortunes made and lost, harsh winters that killed the unprepared. It was a place where people went to reinvent themselves or to disappear. She wasn't sure which category she fell into. The train pulled into Denver just after noon on a clear October day. Lena gathered her single trunk, everything she owned, condensed into one box, and stepped onto the platform. "Miss Whitmore?" She turned to find a man in his 50s, impeccably dressed despite the dust of the frontier town. He had the kind of face that inspired trust, strong features, kind eyes, a smile that seemed genuine. "I'm Duncan Rourke," he said, extending his hand. "Welcome to Colorado." Lena shook his hand, noting the firm grip, the expensive watch chain, the way other men on the platform deferred to him with small nods and murmured greetings. This was a man of importance, a man used to getting what he wanted. "Thank you for meeting me, Mr. Rourke." Of course, of course. "I hope the journey wasn't too difficult?" He gestured to a waiting carriage, polished black, pulled by two fine horses. Everything about Duncan Rourke spoke of wealth and power. "It was long," Lena said carefully. "I'm sure. But you're here now, safe." That smile again, warm and reassuring. "I thought we'd take a room at the hotel for tonight. Let you rest, freshen up. We'll head up the mountain tomorrow morning." "That's very kind." As they drove through Denver's bustling streets, Duncan kept up a steady stream of pleasant conversation. The growth of the town, the mining industry, the beauty of the mountains. He mentioned his son only once, in passing. "Caleb's a quiet man, keeps to himself, but he's good-hearted. He'll take care of you." Lena nodded, her hands folded in her lap. She wanted to ask questions. What does he look like? What happened to make him so isolated? Why would he agree to marry a dying woman he's never met? But the words stuck in her throat. It didn't matter anyway. She wasn't here to be curious. She was here to be provided for. That night, in a hotel room nicer than any she'd ever stayed in, Lena sat by the window and looked out at the mountains. They were dark silhouettes against a star-filled sky, vast and unknowable. Tomorrow she'd meet the man she was supposed to marry, the man who thought she was dying, the man her family had sold her to. She should feel something, fear, anger, sadness, but she just felt numb. Maybe that was a blessing. Maybe numbness would make whatever came next easier to bear. She touched the locket at her throat, her grandmother's, the only piece of her old life she'd kept, and tried to imagine a future. But all she saw was darkness and mountain and the terrible, endless unknown. They left Denver before dawn. The journey up the mountain took 6 hours by horse and wagon, following a trail that grew narrower and rougher with each passing mile. Duncan drove the wagon himself, pointing out landmarks with the easy confidence of someone who'd made this trip 100 times. Lena sat beside him, her trunk secured in the back, her body jolting with every rock and rut. She dressed in her plainest traveling clothes, a brown wool dress, practical boots, a heavy shawl against the mountain cold. The temperature had dropped noticeably as they climbed, and the air had a thin, sharp quality that made her lungs work harder. "Not much farther now," Duncan said as they rounded another switchback. "The cabin's just beyond this ridge." "Does your son live here year-round?" Lena asked. It was the first question she'd asked all morning. "He does. Has for the past 3 years, built the cabin himself." There was pride in Duncan's voice, mixed with something else. Worry, maybe. Or confusion. "He prefers the solitude. That must be, difficult for you, having him so far away." Duncan glanced at her, and for a moment, his practiced smile slipped. "Caleb went through some things during the war. He came back, changed, different. We've learned to respect his choices, even when we don't understand them." The war. Of course. Lena had been 15 when it started, 20 when it ended. She remembered the endless casualty lists in the newspapers, the black wreaths on neighbors' doors, the men who came home hollow-eyed and silent. So Caleb Rourke was a soldier. That explained the isolation, perhaps, the need to hide away on a mountain where the only battles were against weather and wilderness. It didn't explain why he'd agree to marry a stranger, unless he really was as desperate for companionship as she was desperate to escape. Two broken people making a deal that benefited no one but their families. The thought should have been depressing. Instead, it was almost comforting. At least they were equally trapped. The wagon crested this final ridge, and Duncan pulled the horses to a stop. "There," he said softly. "Home." Lena looked. The cabin sat in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines. It was larger than she'd expected, 2 stories, solidly built from logs that had weathered to a silvery gray. A stone chimney rose from one side, smoke curling lazily into the clear blue sky. Behind the cabin, she could see a barn and what looked like a root cellar built into the hillside. It looked permanent, like someone had built it to last, not as a temporary shelter. And standing in front of the cabin, perfectly still, was a man. Duncan snapped the reins and the wagon rolled forward. As they drew closer, Lena got her first clear look at her husband-to-be. Caleb Rourke was tall, at least 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the kind of build that came from hard physical labor. He wore simple clothes, dark pants, a flannel shirt, boots that had seen serious use. His hair was brown, longer than fashion dictated, falling past his collar. He had a beard, neatly trimmed, and eyes that she couldn't quite make out from this distance. He didn't look violent. He didn't look disfigured. He looked wary, like a wolf watching strangers approach his den. Duncan brought the wagon to a stop and climbed down. "Caleb, good to see you, son." "Father?" Caleb's voice was deep, quiet. His eyes went to Lena, still sitting in the wagon, and she saw them clearly for the first time. Gray, storm cloud gray, intense and guarded. Not the eyes of a monster, the eyes of a man who'd learned not to trust easily. "Miss Whitmore," Duncan said, turning to help her down. "May I introduce my son, Caleb Rourke?" "Caleb, this is Lena Whitmore." Lena stepped down from the wagon, her legs unsteady after the long ride. She stood there in the mountain clearing facing this stranger and realized she had no idea what to say. "Hello, I'm the dying woman you've agreed to shelter. Nice to meet you. I'm the desperate spinster your father bought?" In the end, she simply said, "Mr. Rourke, Miss Whitmore." He didn't move to shake her hand or offer any other greeting, just stood there studying her with those gray eyes that seemed to catalog every detail, looking for signs of illness, probably, wondering how long he'd have to play nursemaid before he could return to his solitude. An awkward silence stretched out. Duncan cleared his throat. "Well, why don't we get Miss Whitmore settled? I'm sure she's tired from the journey." Caleb nodded once and turned toward the cabin. "I'll get her trunk." He moved with economical grace, lifting Lena's trunk from the wagon as if it weighed nothing. Duncan followed him, chattering about the weather and the cabin and anything else that might fill the uncomfortable quiet. Lena stood in the clearing, breathing the sharp mountain air, and felt the numbness crack just a little bit. This was real. This was happening. In a matter of hours, she'd be married to this silent, guarded stranger and left alone with him on this mountain. She'd expected to feel afraid. Instead, she felt curious, because Caleb Rourke didn't look like a man who'd agreed to shelter a dying woman out of charity. He looked like a man who'd made a calculated decision and was already regretting it. She wondered what he saw when he looked at her. A burden? A responsibility? A problem to be managed until nature took its course? She wondered if he saw her at all, or just the lie his father had told him. Well, Lena thought as she followed the men toward the cabin, at least we'll both be disappointed. The interior of the cabin was surprisingly well appointed. The main floor was one large room with a stone fireplace dominating the far wall. To the left was a kitchen area with a cast iron stove, rough-hewn cabinets, and a sturdy table with 2 chairs. To the right was a living area with a comfortable-looking sofa, 2 armchairs, and shelves lined with books. A narrow staircase led to the second floor, where Lena assumed the bedrooms were. Everything was clean and organized with a precision that spoke of military discipline. No clutter, no mess, no personal touches beyond the books. It was functional and impersonal, a place where someone lived but didn't quite inhabit. "I've prepared the upstairs bedroom for you," Caleb said, setting her trunk down near the stairs. "Fresh linens, water pitcher. There's a window facing east so you'll get morning sun." "Thank you." He nodded and retreated to the kitchen area, putting distance between them. Duncan watched the exchange with poorly concealed concern. "Perhaps we should discuss the arrangements," Duncan said carefully. "Before the ceremony." Caleb's jaw tightened. "What's to discuss?" "You made the arrangements. We're following through." "Yes, but Miss Whitmore might have questions, concerns." Duncan looked at Lena. "This is all very sudden for you, my dear. Please, if there's anything you'd like to know." "When is the ceremony?" Lena asked. Both men looked at her in surprise, as if they'd forgotten she could speak. "Tomorrow morning," Duncan said. "I've arranged for a minister from town to come up. Nothing elaborate, just a simple service, unless you'd prefer to wait." "Tomorrow is fine." She saw something flicker in Caleb's eyes. Approval? Relief? It was gone too quickly to identify. "Very well," Duncan said. "I've brought supplies. Food, medical items, things that might make the next few months more comfortable." He paused delicately. "I understand this is difficult for both of you, but I want you to know, Miss Whitmore, that you'll be well cared for here. Caleb may be reserved, but he's a good man. Honorable." Lena wanted to laugh. Honorable. Was it honorable to marry a woman you believed was dying? Was it honorable to accept payment for sheltering a stranger? But she just nodded. "I'm sure we'll manage." Of course, of course." Duncan was already moving toward the door, clearly eager to escape the tension. "I'll return in the morning with the minister, around 9 o'clock. Caleb, perhaps you could show Miss Whitmore around? Help her get acquainted with the situation?" "Father, I'll see you tomorrow, son." And with that, Duncan Rourke fled to his wagon, leaving them alone. The silence that followed his departure was deafening. Lena stood in the middle of the cabin, acutely aware of Caleb on the other side of the room. He'd positioned himself near the kitchen, his back to her, ostensibly organizing something on the counter. But she could see the tension in his shoulders, the careful distance he was maintaining. He was afraid of her. Or rather, afraid of what she represented. The intrusion into his carefully constructed solitude. The responsibility. The eventual grief of watching someone waste away. "He thinks I'm dying," she reminded herself. "He thinks he's taking in a fragile, failing woman." The absurdity of it struck her suddenly. Here they both stood, trapped in an arrangement neither wanted, both believing lies about the other. She should be angry, should be terrified, should be 100 different things. Instead, she was just tired. "Mr. Rourke," she said quietly. His shoulders tensed. "Yes?" "I appreciate your hospitality, but you don't need to entertain me or make small talk. I understand this is an imposition." He turned slowly to face her. Those gray eyes were wary, searching. "An imposition? You agreed to shelter a dying woman. I imagine that's burden enough without having to pretend at pleasantries." She kept her voice even, factual. "I'll try to be as little trouble as possible." Something shifted in his expression. "You're very direct." "I've found it saves time." A long pause. Then, unexpectedly, the corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "Your room is upstairs," he said. "First door on the left. There's a wash basin and fresh water. Dinner will be ready around 6. "Thank you. Miss Whitmore?" He stopped her as she moved toward the stairs. "Yes?" "The mountain's no place for pretending. If you need something, say so. If you're in pain, tell me. If you're... He struggled for a moment. If you're frightened, I won't make it worse. That's a promise. Lena looked at this stranger, this man who thought she was dying, who'd agreed to marry her anyway, who was offering her the only comfort he knew how to give. I'm not frightened, she said, and realized it was true. Whatever happened next, she wasn't afraid. She was past fear, past hope, past most feelings entirely. She was just here, on a mountain, with a stranger. It was almost liberating. She climbed the stairs to her room and closed the door behind her. The bedroom was small but comfortable. A brass bed with a thick quilt, a dresser with a mirror, a wooden chair by the window. Everything clean, everything simple. Lena sat on the edge of the bed and looked out the window at the pine forest stretching endlessly into the distance. No houses, no people, no whispers or pitying glances or family expectations. Just mountain and sky and silence. For the first time in 3 years, she felt like she could breathe. Caleb stood at the kitchen counter long after Lena had gone upstairs, his hands braced against the wood, trying to process what had just happened. She wasn't what he'd expected. He'd expected fragile, consumptive, someone who'd need constant care and speak in whispers and fade quietly into death like mist burning off the mountain. Instead, he'd gotten her, direct, composed, aware of exactly what this arrangement was and unafraid to acknowledge it. I'll try to be as little trouble as possible. He'd seen the exhaustion in her eyes, the bone-deep weariness that had nothing to do with physical illness. This was a woman who'd been ground down by something, life, family, circumstance, until she'd stopped fighting and started simply enduring. He recognized it because he saw the same thing in his own mirror every morning. She was dying, his father had said. Consumption. Maybe a year. Looking at her, Caleb didn't see death. He saw resignation, which was almost worse. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. He opened it to find his father standing there with a box of supplies. Forgot these, Duncan said, setting the box inside. Then, lower. How is she? Resting. She seems stronger than I expected. Duncan's voice was careful. The journey must not have taxed her as much as we feared. Caleb looked at his father, really looked at him, seeing past the concern to the calculation beneath. Duncan Rourke didn't do anything without multiple angles, multiple benefits. Why did you really arrange this? Caleb asked quietly. I told you. The truth, Father. Duncan sighed. The Whitmores needed to relocate their daughter. Circumstances in Hartford had become untenable. I needed to ensure you weren't going to waste away on this mountain alone. It was mutually beneficial. Relocate. Caleb's jaw tightened. You make her sound like furniture. Don't be dramatic. The girl gets security and care for whatever time she has left. You get companionship without the expectations of a normal marriage. Everyone benefits. Except her. She agreed to come, didn't she? Duncan's voice hardened slightly. Don't make me the villain here, Caleb. I'm trying to help both of you. Caleb wanted to argue, to push back against the smooth justifications. But what was the point? The arrangement was made. Lena Whitmore was upstairs, unpacking her trunk. Tomorrow they'd be married. The deal was done. Thank you for the supplies, he said flatly. Duncan recognized the dismissal. I'll see you tomorrow, 9 o'clock. And Caleb? Try to be kind. Whatever time she has left, make it peaceful. That's all I ask. After his father left, Caleb stood in the empty cabin and wondered what the hell he'd gotten himself into. He'd wanted solitude. He'd built this cabin specifically to escape people and their demands and their expectations. And now he'd agreed to let a stranger move in, to marry her, to watch her die. For peace, he reminded himself. So father stops sending women up here. So mother stops worrying. So everyone leaves me alone. But looking at the closed door upstairs, Caleb felt something he hadn't expected. Curiosity. Who was Lena Whitmore? What had happened in Hartford to make relocation necessary? Why had she agreed to marry a stranger on a mountain? And why, when she'd stood in his cabin and acknowledged the absurdity of their situation with such stark honesty, had he felt the first spark of genuine interest he'd experienced in 3 years? He pushed the thoughts away and focused on practical matters. Dinner needed to be started. The barn needed checking. Firewood needed splitting. Tomorrow, he'd be married. Tonight, he'd pretend everything was normal, even though nothing about this was normal at all. But tomorrow morning arrives with impossible clarity. A minister speaks words that mean everything and nothing. Two strangers make promises they never planned to keep. And somewhere in the gulf between their lies, something neither expected begins to take root. But first, they'll have to survive the truth. The minister arrived at 9 o'clock sharp, riding a tired mare and carrying a leather-bound book that had seen better days. Reverend Thomas Blackwell was a lean man in his 60s with kind eyes and the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades ministering to frontier congregations. He didn't ask questions about the bride's health or the groom's isolation. He'd performed stranger ceremonies in stranger places. Duncan Rourke had spared no expense on the wedding breakfast, despite the rustic setting. Fresh bread, honey, preserves, coffee that actually tasted like coffee instead of the chicory blend most mountain folks made do with. It sat untouched on Caleb's table while the four of them stood in the main room, morning light streaming through the windows. Lena wore the pale blue dress she'd traveled in. She'd pinned her hair up carefully, added her grandmother's locket, and looked every inch the respectable New England lady she'd been raised to be. Only the shadows under her eyes betrayed her sleepless night. Caleb had shaved and put on a clean shirt. That was the extent of his preparation. "Shall we begin?" Reverend Blackwell asked gently. They stood before the fireplace. Duncan positioned himself as witness, his expression carefully neutral. The Reverend opened his book and began to read. Lena barely heard the words. She was too focused on staying upright, on keeping her hands from shaking, on maintaining the composure that had been drilled into her since childhood. This was happening. This was real. In a few minutes, she'd be married to the stranger, bound to him legally and permanently. No going back. Not that there'd been anywhere to go back to. "Caleb Nathaniel Rourke, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" A pause that stretched just long enough to be noticeable. "I do." His voice was steady, but Lena caught the slight tension in his jaw. He was going through with it, but he wasn't happy about it. Well, that made two of them. "Lena Margaret Whitmore, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" This was it. The last moment she could stop this. She looked at Caleb, really looked at him. He was watching her with those storm gray eyes, and she saw no cruelty there, no violence, just wariness and resignation that mirrored her own. Two people trapped in the same lie, making the best of it. "I do," she said clearly. Reverend Blackwell smiled. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Caleb went absolutely still. Lena's breath caught. They hadn't discussed this, hadn't prepared for this moment. After a beat too long, Caleb stepped forward and pressed a brief, chaste kiss to her forehead. It was over in a second, more brotherly than romantic, but it sent an unexpected shock through Lena's system. The first deliberate touch from another human being in longer than she could remember. "Congratulations," Duncan said, his voice overly hearty. "Welcome to the family, Lena." The Reverend closed his book and accepted Duncan's generous payment with murmured thanks. He stayed long enough for coffee and a piece of bread, making gentle small talk about the weather and the approaching winter, then excused himself to ride back down the mountain. Duncan lingered, clearly uncomfortable with the awkward silence that had settled over the cabin. "Well," he said finally, "I should be going as well. Let you two settle in." He looked at Caleb. "You have everything you need? We're fine. Lena, if you need anything at all, you can send word down with the supply wagon. It comes up twice a month." "Thank you, Mr. Rourke." "Duncan, please, we're family now." He pulled on his coat and hat, hesitating at the door. "Take care of each other." Then he was gone, and Lena and Caleb were alone, married. The silence was suffocating. Lena moved to the window, needing something to do with her hands, something to look at besides her new husband. Outside, the morning was crystalline and perfect, the kind of autumn day that made you believe the world was a beautiful place. I'll show you around, Caleb said abruptly. The property, so you know where everything is. All right. He grabbed two heavy coats from pegs by the door and handed her one. It's colder than it looks. She put it on, far too large for her, clearly his spare, and followed him outside. The mountain air hit her like a slap, sharp and clean, and so cold it made her lungs ache. But there was something exhilarating about it too, something that made her feel awake for the first time in weeks. Caleb led her behind the cabin to the barn, a solid structure that housed 2 horses, a milk cow, and several chickens scratching in a fenced yard. This is Shadow and Ember, he said, gesturing to the horses. Shadow's the gelding, steadier. If you need to ride, use him. Ember's temperamental. He moved to the cow. Bessie, she needs milking twice a day, morning and evening. I don't know how to milk a cow, Lena admitted. He looked at her, and she thought she saw a flicker of surprise. You don't? I'm from Hartford. We bought milk from vendors. A pause. Then, I'll teach you. They continued the tour. The root cellar stocked with potatoes, carrots, turnips, and preserved goods. The smokehouse with hanging venison and rabbit. The woodshed, half filled with split logs. The small creek that ran along the eastern edge of the property, currently running clear and cold. Water's safe to drink, Caleb said, but it'll freeze over in a few weeks. I have a hand pump closer to the cabin for winter. Lena nodded, trying to absorb the overwhelming amount of information. This world was so foreign to her. In Hartford, she'd never had to think about where water came from, or how food was preserved, or what happened when winter hit. Servants and vendors had handled all of that. Here, survival depended on knowing these things. The forest is full of game, Caleb continued, pointing to the tree line. Deer, elk, rabbit, sometimes bear. I hunt regularly, set traps. He glanced at her. I assume you don't know how to shoot? No. Can you cook? Lena hesitated. Basic things, nothing elaborate. She could almost see him recalculating, adjusting his expectations. He'd been told she was dying, probably assumed she'd be too weak to do much of anything. Instead, he'd gotten a woman who was healthy but utterly unprepared for mountain life. We'll figure it out, he said finally. You'll learn what you need to learn. They walked back toward the cabin, and Lana felt compelled to ask the question that had been burning since yesterday. Why did you agree to this? Caleb stopped walking. What? The marriage. Why did you agree to marry a dying woman you'd never met? His jaw tightened. My father told you that? He mentioned it, said I had consumption, that you were being charitable. A muscle worked in Caleb's cheek. He was quiet for so long that Lena thought he wouldn't answer. Then, I wanted to be left alone. A wife who wouldn't last the year seemed like the best way to make that happen. The brutal honesty of it should have hurt. Instead, Lena almost laughed. At least you're honest about it. Are you? He turned to face her fully. Dying, I mean. Are you actually dying? This was it, the moment the lie could unravel. Lena met his eyes. No, I'm perfectly healthy. She watched emotions flicker across his face. Surprise, confusion, then something that might have been anger. Your father lied to you, Lena continued. Mine lied to me too. They told me you were violent and disfigured, that you'd probably kill me within the month, that this was my only option because no decent man would have me. She kept her voice steady, factual. We've both been manipulated into this arrangement for our family's convenience. Caleb stared at her. You're not sick at all. Not even slightly. Then why? He stopped, running a hand through his hair. Why would they? I was an embarrassment in Hartford. Unmarried at 31, no prospects, taking up space in my father's house. Your father paid him to take me off his hands, and apparently told you I was dying so you'd feel obligated to go through with it. She paused. I found out the truth from your father's comments yesterday. Little things he said that didn't add up. Caleb turned away, his shoulders rigid. She could see him processing, working through the implications. We can get it annulled, he said finally, on grounds of fraud. You can go back to Denver. I'll make sure you have enough money to... Go where? Lena interrupted. Back to Hartford, where I'm a failure? To Denver, where I know no one? I have nowhere to go, Mr. Rourke. And honestly, she took a breath. Even with the lies, this is still better than what I left behind. He turned back to her, studying her face like he was seeing her for the first time. You'd rather stay here, on a mountain, with a stranger. I'd rather have a chance to breathe without everyone watching me, judging me, finding me wanting. If that means learning to milk a cow and chop wood, so be it. A long silence stretched between them. Then Caleb did something unexpected. He laughed. It was a rusty sound, like something that hadn't been used in a while, but it was genuine. What? Lena asked. We really are a pair of fools, aren't we? Both so desperate to escape our lives that we walked straight into a trap. A trap we're now legally bound to. For better or worse. In sickness and in health. Their eyes met, and something shifted. Not warmth exactly, but recognition, understanding. They'd both been lied to, both been used, both been cornered into this arrangement by families that saw them as problems to be solved. But they were here now, married, and going back meant admitting defeat to the very people who'd orchestrated this mess. 1 week, Caleb said suddenly. What? Stay for 1 week. Learn what mountain life is actually like. Then decide if you want to stay or if you want me to take you back to Denver. He paused. If you stay, we make this work on our terms, not theirs. We figure out how two people who don't want to be married can at least coexist peacefully. And if I leave, then I'll make sure you're provided for. Enough money to start over somewhere. It's not your fault our fathers are bastards. Lena considered the offer. 1 week. 7 days to decide if she could build a life here, in this harsh and beautiful place, with this strange and guarded man. It was more choice than she'd been given in years. 1 week, she agreed, but I want to learn. Really learn. Not just watch you do everything while I sit inside like an invalid. You sure? It's not easy work. I'm sure. Caleb extended his hand. Deal. Lena shook it, and this time the touch didn't surprise her. His hand was calloused and strong, and the grip was firm but not crushing. We should probably establish some ground rules, she said. Such as? Sleeping arrangements, for one. A flush crept up Caleb's neck. The upstairs bedroom is yours. I'll take the couch. That's not sustainable. This is your home. You shouldn't be uncomfortable in it. There's a small room off the barn. I can set up a bed there. In the barn? In winter? I've slept in worse places. Lena thought about pushing back, but the set of his jaw told her this wasn't negotiable. Fine. They could revisit it later if needed. Meals? She asked. We'll cook together, share the work. I'll teach you what you need to know. And the rest of it? The daily routine? Caleb considered. I usually wake at dawn, check the animals, chop wood, hunt or trap depending on the day. Midday meal is simple. Bread, cheese, whatever's available. Evening meal is the main one. After that, I usually read or work on maintenance projects. He paused. You can join me or do your own thing. I won't demand your company. What if I want to help? With the work, I mean. Then you help. He looked at her curiously. Why would you want to? Because sitting idle makes me feel useless. I've had enough of being useless. Something in his expression softened slightly. All right, tomorrow we start. I'll teach you the basics, but Lena, he used her first name deliberately. It's hard work, physical, sometimes dangerous. If you can't keep up, you need to say so. I will. They walked back to the cabin in a silence that was less oppressive than before. Not comfortable exactly, but not hostile either. Inside, Caleb began preparing the midday meal. Bread, cheese, cold venison from the smokehouse. Lena helped without being asked, setting the table, pouring water from the pitcher. They moved around each other carefully, two people learning the dance of shared space. As they ate, Lena found herself studying him. Without the filter of her family's lies, she could see Caleb more clearly. He was handsome in a rugged way, but that wasn't what struck her. It was the careful control in every movement, every word, like he was holding himself together by sheer will. Can I ask you something? She said. He looked up from his plate, wary. What? Your father mentioned the war. Is that why you came up here? The shutters came down immediately. His face went blank. I don't talk about the war. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. It's fine. But his tone said it wasn't. Just, that's off limits. Lena nodded. Understood. They finished the meal in silence. Caleb cleared the dishes, and Lena noticed his hands were shaking slightly. She'd touched a nerve. opened a door he'd firmly closed. She wouldn't make that mistake again. That afternoon, Caleb disappeared into the forest with his rifle, leaving Lena alone in the cabin. She spent the time exploring more thoroughly. The books on the shelves were an eclectic mix: Shakespeare, Dickens, technical manuals on farming and forestry, medical texts. Someone who lived here loved to read. Upstairs, she unpacked her trunk properly. Her clothes looked absurdly out of place in the rough mountain room. Silk and lace designed for parlors and garden parties, utterly useless here. She'd need new clothes, practical ones. She wondered if Caleb knew how to sew or if there was a town nearby where she could buy fabric. So many things she didn't know, so many skills she'd need to learn. The enormity of it hit her suddenly. She'd agreed to stay a week, but what if she couldn't do it? What if she failed at every task, proved herself as useless here as she'd been in Hartford? What if Caleb decided she was more trouble than she was worth? Lena sat on the edge of the bed and forced herself to breathe. 1 week. She just had to survive 1 week. Then she could make an informed decision. She could do that. She had to. Caleb returned at dusk with 2 rabbits already dressed and ready to cook. He showed her how to prepare them, how to season the meat, how to roast them over the fire. His instructions were clear and patient, and Lena found herself actually enjoying the process. "You're a good teacher," she said as they worked. Had practice, teaching new recruits during the war. It was the first time he'd mentioned it voluntarily. Lena didn't push, just nodded and focused on cutting vegetables the way he'd shown her. Dinner was simple but good. They ate in the living area, sitting in the armchairs by the fire. Outside, darkness had fallen completely, and the temperature was dropping fast. "It gets cold at night," Caleb said. "There are extra blankets in the chest at the foot of your bed. Don't be stubborn about using them." "I won't. And if you hear animals outside, wolves mainly, sometimes a mountain lion, don't panic. The cabin's solid. They won't get in." Lena's eyes widened. "Mountain lions?" "Rare. But they're out there." He saw her expression and added, "I've been here 3 years. Never had one try to break in. They're more afraid of humans than we are of them." "That's not as comforting as you think it is." The corner of his mouth twitched. Almost a smile. They fell into a surprisingly easy conversation after that. Nothing deep. Just practical talk about the mountain, the weather patterns, the wildlife. Caleb was more relaxed than he'd been all day. And Lena realized this was his element: nature, survival, things he understood and could control. People apparently were harder. When the fire burned low, Caleb stood. "I should check the barn before bed. Make sure everything's secure. I'll clean up here." He nodded and pulled on his coat. At the door, he paused. "Lena?" "Yes?" "Tomorrow starts early, dawn. If you're serious about learning, be ready." "I will be." After he left, Lena cleaned the dishes and banked the fire. She climbed the stairs to her room and got ready for bed, changing into the nightgown her mother had packed. Through the window, she could see Caleb's silhouette moving in the barn, carrying a lantern, setting up his makeshift bedroom so she could have privacy. It seemed absurd. They were married, legally bound, and yet they were living like strangers, circling each other carefully, maintaining rigid boundaries. But maybe that was for the best. Maybe boundaries would keep them both safe from whatever chaos their families had tried to create. Lena climbed into bed and pulled the heavy quilts up to her chin. The bed was comfortable, the room was warm enough, and outside the window, the mountain was silent and vast. She'd survived her first day as Lena Rourke, only 6 more to go. Dawn came brutally early. Lena woke to a knock on her door and Caleb's voice calling, "Time to get up." She dragged herself out of bed, every muscle protesting. She'd barely slept, too aware of the strange sounds, the unfamiliar bed, the weight of her new reality. But she'd made a promise. 1 week, full commitment. She dressed quickly in her plainest dress and went downstairs to find Caleb already making coffee. He looked like he'd been up for hours. "First lesson," he said, handing her a tin cup. "Coffee first. Always. Nothing else makes sense without it." The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, but Lena drank it gratefully. "We'll start with the animals," Caleb continued. "Then I'll show you how to split wood. This afternoon, if there's time, we'll work on starting fires properly." Lena nodded, feeling overwhelmed already. The barn was warmer than expected, the animals' body heat taking the edge off the morning chill. Caleb showed her how to feed the horses, how to muck out their stalls, how to check their hooves for stones. Then came the milk cow. Bessie's temperamental, Caleb warned, but she'll tolerate you if you're gentle. He demonstrated the milking technique, his large hands moving with surprising gentleness. Then he moved aside. Your turn. Lena sat on the stool and reached for the cow's udder, feeling ridiculous and incompetent. Her first attempt produced nothing. The second got her a disgruntled moo from Bessie. Firmer, Caleb said from behind her. You're not going to hurt her. Steady pressure, rhythmic. On the third try, milk actually came out. Lena felt a surge of triumph, completely disproportionate to the accomplishment. Good, Caleb said. Keep that rhythm. Fill the pail about halfway. It took her 20 minutes to do what Caleb could probably do in 5. But by the end, she had a pail of fresh milk and hands that ached from the unfamiliar work. Not bad for a first attempt, Caleb said. He actually sounded impressed. Next came wood splitting. Caleb handed her an axe that felt impossibly heavy. Watch first. He set a log on the chopping block and brought the axe down in one smooth, powerful motion. The log split cleanly in half. Your turn. Lena positioned a log the way he'd shown her, lifted the axe, brought it down. The blade bounced off the log harmlessly. Again, higher arc. Use your whole body, not just your arms. She tried again. This time the axe bit into the wood but didn't split it. Better, once more. By the 10th attempt, her arms were shaking. By the 20th, she was sweating despite the cold. But finally, she split a log cleanly. Caleb nodded. Good. Now do it 40 more times. Lena stared at him. 40? We go through about 2 cords of wood a month in winter. Someone has to split it. He picked up his own axe. We'll work together. It'll go faster. They spent the next 2 hours splitting wood. Lena's hands blistered, her back screamed, and she was pretty sure she'd never been this tired in her entire life. But something strange happened. As the pile of split logs grew, as Caleb worked beside her in companionable silence, as the morning sun warmed her face, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Useful, purpose. Like her existence actually mattered, even if only to add to a woodpile. That's enough, Caleb said finally. Let's eat. Lunch was bread and cheese again, eaten standing up because Lena wasn't sure she could lower herself into a chair and get back up. Caleb watched her wince and said, You'll be sore tomorrow. Even worse the day after. Pushed yourself too hard. You said 40 logs. I didn't think you'd actually do it. I said I wanted to learn. He studied her with those gray eyes. Most people quit when they realize how hard it actually is. I'm not most people. No, he said slowly. I'm starting to realize that. That afternoon, he taught her fire starting. How to build a proper kindling base, how to stack wood for optimal airflow, how to coax flame from ember. It took her a dozen tries before she got a fire going without his help, but when she finally did, the satisfaction was immense. Tomorrow we'll work on hunting, Caleb said as they watched her fire burn. Setting snares, tracking, field dressing. It's not pleasant work. Will you show me how to shoot? He hesitated. Eventually, when I'm sure you won't accidentally shoot me. Fair enough. That evening, they fell into the same routine as the night before. Dinner preparation, quiet conversation, reading by the fire. Lena's whole body ached, but it was a good ache, an earned ache. As she climbed the stairs to bed, Caleb called after her. Lena? She turned. Yes? You did well today, better than I expected. It was a small compliment, gruffly given, but it made her smile as she closed her bedroom door. Day 1 of her real education was complete. 6 more days to prove herself. She had a feeling they were going to be the longest and shortest week of her life. The week that followed blurred into a relentless cycle of dawn wake-ups, grueling physical labor, and collapse into exhausted sleep. Lena learned to set rabbit snares, to track deer through the forest, to gut and clean game without flinching. She learned which plants were edible and which would kill you, how to read weather in the sky, how to sharpen a knife properly. Caleb was a demanding teacher, but a fair one. When she succeeded, he acknowledged it. When she failed, he simply showed her again. He never mocked, never lost patience, never made her feel stupid for not knowing things. It was the first time in her life anyone had taught her something without underlying judgment. And slowly, something began to change between them. It started with small things. Caleb began anticipating her coffee in the morning, having it ready when she came downstairs. Lena learned how he liked his evening meal prepared and started cooking without being asked. They developed a rhythm, a partnership born of necessity, but evolving into something almost comfortable. On the fourth day, as they worked together to repair a section of fence, Caleb said, "You're going to stay, aren't you?" Lena looked up from the post she was holding. "What makes you say that?" "You're not just learning, you're planning. I've seen you taking mental notes, asking questions about winter preparation, long-term maintenance." He drove a nail home with 3 efficient strikes. Someone who's leaving in 3 days doesn't care about proper food storage techniques. She couldn't argue with that. "Does it bother you?" "Should it? This was supposed to be temporary. A way to get your father off your back." Caleb set down his hammer and looked at her directly. "Our fathers lied to us. They don't get to dictate what happens next. That's up to us." "And what do you want to happen?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know yet, but I do know that the past 4 days have been different. Not bad different, just different." "Different how?" "The cabin doesn't feel as empty. The work doesn't feel as pointless when there's someone else benefiting from it." He picked up the hammer again, not meeting her eyes. "I'm not saying I'm ready for some grand romantic partnership, but I think we could make a decent team, if you're willing." Lena's heart did something complicated in her chest. This wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't even really affection. But it was honest, and it was more than she dared hope for. "I'm willing," she said quietly. They finished the fence in comfortable silence, and that night Lena made a decision. She was staying. Not because she had nowhere else to go, not because she was trapped, but because for the first time in her life she'd found a place where her worth wasn't measured by marriage prospects or social graces. Where her value came from what she could do, what she could learn, what she could contribute. And because Caleb Rourke, with all his walls and wounds, was the first person who'd ever looked at her and seen possibility instead of failure. That was worth fighting for. The week became 2, then 3. October surrendered to November, and the mountain began its transformation into winter. Snow dusted the peaks above them, and the morning frost lasted longer each day. Lena's hands grew calloused, her muscles stopped screaming, and the mirror showed her a woman she barely recognized. Face sun-touched despite the cold, eyes clearer, shoulders straight with earned confidence. She'd become competent, not expert, but capable. She could split a day's worth of wood without supervision, could milk Bessie without complaint from either party, could cook meals that were actually edible. The expensive dresses from Hartford stayed folded in her trunk, replaced by simple wool skirts and sturdy boots Caleb had traded for in the nearest settlement. And somewhere in those weeks of shared labor and careful coexistence, something had shifted between them. Not love, neither was ready for that word, but a fragile trust, a recognition that they were building something together, even if neither was quite sure what. Until Duncan Rourke arrived unannounced on a cold Tuesday morning. Lena was in the barn, practicing the rifle technique Caleb had finally agreed to teach her when she heard the wagon. She set the gun down carefully and walked outside to find Duncan climbing down, his expression thunderous. "Where's my son?" he demanded, bypassing any greeting. "In the forest, checking the trap line." Lena kept her voice calm despite the sudden anxiety coiling in her stomach. "Is something wrong?" "Wrong?" Duncan's laugh was sharp. "That depends on your perspective. Is he due back soon?" "Within the hour." "Good. I'll wait inside." He strode toward the cabin like he owned it, leaving Lena to follow. Inside, Duncan paced while Lena put on coffee, her hand steady despite her racing heart. Something had happened. Something bad enough to bring him up the mountain in November, when the journey was becoming dangerous. "You're looking well," Duncan said suddenly, his eyes sharp. "Remarkably well, considering." "Considering what?" "Considering you were supposed to be dying of consumption 3 months ago." He turned to face her fully. "Care to explain that, Lena?" So the truth had caught up with them. Lena met his gaze steadily. "I was never dying. You lied to your son, and my father lied to me. We discovered the truth shortly after the wedding. And you stayed anyway." "I did." "Why?" "Because I chose to." She poured coffee with hands that didn't shake. "Whatever arrangement you and my father made, it's done. Caleb and I have our own agreement now." Duncan's expression shifted, calculation replacing anger. Does Caleb know that your father has been writing letters to every prominent family in Hartford, claiming that you ran away with a mountain hermit and disgraced the Whitmore name? Lena's cup stopped halfway to her mouth. What? Your father is furious that you've stayed. Apparently his plan was for you to annul the marriage within weeks, claim you'd been coerced, and return home quietly. Instead, you've been here for 2 months, and he's received reports that you're thriving. It's made him look like he sold his daughter. Duncan's smile was cold, which of course he did. Reports from whom? Reports from the supply wagon driver. Talks to everyone, that one. Word spreads fast in small communities. Duncan set down his coffee untouched. Your family wants you back, Lena. They're claiming the marriage isn't valid because you were coerced. They've hired lawyers, and they're threatening to expose my family's role in the arrangement if you don't return voluntarily. The floor seemed to tilt beneath Lena's feet. They can't. We're legally married. The ceremony was legitimate. Legitimacy can be challenged, especially when one party is the daughter of a prominent Hartford family and the other is a reclusive veteran no one knows. Duncan's voice was heavy. They're painting Caleb as unstable, dangerous, saying we took advantage of your desperation to trap you in an arrangement you didn't fully understand. That's absurd. I chose to stay. I'm choosing to stay now. Then you'll need to prove it, in Hartford, in front of your family, and whatever legal proceedings they've initiated. He finally met her eyes, and she saw genuine concern there. Lena, I know I manipulated this situation. I'm not proud of it. But if you and Caleb have actually built something real here, you're going to have to fight for it. Because your father won't stop until he either gets you back or destroys my family's reputation trying. The cabin door opened and Caleb walked in, rifle slung over his shoulder, 2 rabbits hanging from his belt. He took in the scene, his father, Lena's pale face, the tension thick enough to cut, and his jaw tightened. Father, what are you doing here? We have a problem, Duncan said. As Duncan explained the situation, Lena watched Caleb's face close down, that careful control slamming into place. But his hands betrayed him, clenching and unclenching at his sides. So they want her back, Caleb said when Duncan finished. Fine. She can go. Caleb, Lena started, this is exactly the kind of drama I came up here to avoid. Lawyers, society, people fighting over... He stopped himself, but the damage was done. Over what? Lena's voice was quiet. Over me? Is that what you were going to say? I didn't mean... You did. She stood, her own anger rising. 2 months, Caleb. 2 months of working together, building this partnership you claim to value. And the moment things get complicated, you want to hand me back like defective merchandise. That's not fair. Isn't it? You're still doing exactly what you did 3 years ago, running away the second things get hard. Caleb's face went white. You don't know anything about what I've been through, because you won't tell me. You want the benefits of having someone here, the company, the help, the partnership. But the moment I need something from you, you shut down. Lena's voice cracked. I can't stay with someone who's always halfway out the door. Then don't. The words were harsh, but his eyes were desperate. Go back to Hartford. Fight your family's lawyers. Clear your name. You don't need me for that. But I want... Lena stopped, the words dying in her throat. What did she want? His support? His protection? His love? She didn't know anymore. Duncan cleared his throat. Perhaps we should all take a breath. Lena, you don't have to decide anything right now, but you should know that the legal proceedings are scheduled to begin next week. If you don't appear, your father will claim you're being held against your will, and things will get exponentially worse. Then I'll go, Lena said, not looking at Caleb. I'll go to Hartford and deal with this myself. I'll take you to Denver tomorrow, Duncan offered. You can catch the train from there. Thank you. The silence that followed was suffocating. Finally, Duncan made his excuses and retreated to the barn to tend his horses, leaving Lena and Caleb alone. You don't have to do this, Caleb said quietly. Yes, I do. My family doesn't get to rewrite what happened here. They don't get to turn me into a victim to save their reputation. Lena forced herself to look at him. But you were right about one thing. I can't fight this battle from a mountain. I have to go back. For how long? I don't know. Weeks? Months? She took a breath. Maybe you'll enjoy having your solitude back. Lena, don't, Please. She moved toward the stairs. I need to pack. She left him standing in the main room, and if she'd looked back, she would have seen him reach for her, then let his hand fall, trapped between wanting to keep her and not knowing how. That night passed in painful silence. Lena packed her trunk, restoring the Hartford dresses to their place, folding away the mountain life she'd built. Caleb disappeared into the barn and didn't return until well after dark. They barely spoke at breakfast. Duncan arrived at dawn with the wagon, and Caleb loaded Lena's trunk without meeting her eyes. Ready? Duncan asked gently. Lena looked at the cabin one last time, the woodpile she'd helped build, the barn where Bessie waited for her morning milking, the forest where she'd learned to track and hunt and survive, the home she'd built from nothing. Ready? She lied. She climbed into the wagon. Duncan snapped the reins. And as they rolled down the mountain trail, Lena didn't look back, because if she did, she'd lose whatever fragile courage was keeping her together. Behind them, Caleb stood in the clearing, watching until the wagon disappeared around the bend. Then he walked into the cabin, into the silence that suddenly felt less like peace and more like loss, and wondered what the hell he'd just let happen. The journey to Denver took all day, and Duncan wisely kept conversation to practical matters. Train schedules, recommended hotels, letters of credit he'd arranged for her expenses. He was trying to help, Lena realized. In his calculating way, Duncan Rourke was trying to make amends for the chaos he'd created. Your father will try to intimidate you, Duncan said as they neared the city. He'll use lawyers, social pressure, family connections. But you have one advantage he doesn't expect. What's that? You're not the same woman who left Hartford. You're stronger now. Don't let him make you forget that. He glanced at her. And Lena? For what it's worth, I think you were good for Caleb. Better than good. I haven't seen him that engaged with life in years. Then why didn't he fight for me to stay? Duncan sighed. Because my son is terrified. Not of you. Of caring about anything enough that losing it would break him again. He paused. The war took something from him, something essential. He came back convinced that everything he touches turns to death. So he stopped touching anything. Until me. Until you. And now he's panicking because you've become important, and important things can be taken away. Duncan pulled the wagon to a stop in front of a respectable hotel. Give him time. Sometimes the bravest people are the slowest to recognize their own courage. Lena climbed down, trunk in hand, and watched Duncan drive away. Then she turned to face the bustling streets of Denver, steeling herself for the battle ahead. The train to Hartford left the next morning. 4 days later, Lena stepped off the train in Hartford and was immediately ambushed by her mother. Lena, oh, thank the heavens, you're all right. Eleanor Whitmore embraced her daughter with theatrical relief, playing to the small crowd that had gathered. We were so worried, so desperately worried. Hello, Mother. Lena extracted herself from the embrace, noting the perfectly styled hair, the expensive dress, the calculated performance. Where's Father? At home. Waiting. He's been beside himself. Eleanor's eyes scanned Lena critically. You look different. I've been living on a mountain. Different is inevitable. Well, you're home now. Safe. We'll get this terrible mess sorted out, and everything can go back to normal. Normal. The word made Lena want to laugh. The house on Maple Street looked exactly as she'd left it, imposing, pristine, and utterly lifeless. Her father was waiting in his study, the same study where he'd informed her of the marriage arrangement 3 months ago. Lena. Robert Whitmore stood but didn't approach. You look well. I am well. That's good. Surprising, but good. He gestured to a chair. Sit. We have much to discuss. Lena remained standing. I received word that you're contesting my marriage. A marriage that never should have happened. You were manipulated, Lena. Coerced into an arrangement with a man who's clearly unstable. The Rourkes took advantage of our family's difficult situation. The Rourkes paid you $10,000 to take me off your hands. That's not coercion. That's a business transaction. One you initiated. Robert's face flushed. Lower your voice. The staff already knows, Father. The whole town knows. You sold your daughter and then regretted it when I didn't come crawling back broken and grateful. That's not... He stopped, recalibrating. Lena, be reasonable. You've been living alone with a stranger on a mountain. Your reputation is in tatters. The only way to salvage this is to annul the marriage, claim you were coerced, and start fresh. Start fresh how? By pretending this never happened? By letting you sell me to someone else? By protecting your future? My future is in Colorado, with my husband. The words hung in the air, stunning them both. Because Lena realized, saying it out loud, that it was true. Whatever was or wasn't between her and Caleb, whatever fragile thing they'd built, it was hers. She'd earned it. And she'd be damned if she let her family destroy it to save face. You can't possibly mean that, Robert said slowly. Lena, you've been alone for 2 months with a man you barely know. You've clearly been influenced. I've been liberated. There's a difference. She moved toward the door. I'm going to the courthouse tomorrow to file an affidavit stating that I entered into my marriage willingly and remain in it willingly. Your lawsuit will be dismissed, and then I'm going back to Colorado, and you're going to leave me alone. Like hell I will. Robert's composure cracked. You think I'm going to let you throw your life away on some damaged soldier hiding in the mountains? You think I'll stand by while you disgrace this family further? You already disgraced us. You just don't want anyone to know. She walked out, ignoring her father's shouts, and went directly to her old bedroom. It looked like a museum. Everything preserved exactly as she'd left it, as if her parents had convinced themselves she'd be back any day. The bird-shaped water stain on the ceiling stared down at her, and Lena realized she didn't see freedom in it anymore. She'd found actual freedom, and it looked like a mountain cabin and calloused hands and a man who was terrified of needing anyone. That night, lying in her old bed, Lena made plans. She'd file her affidavit in the morning. She'd make a public statement if necessary. She'd fight whatever legal battles her father threw at her. And then she'd go back, whether Caleb was ready for her or not. The courthouse proceedings were brutal. Her father's lawyer painted her as mentally unstable, claiming the mountain isolation had damaged her judgment. They presented medical experts who testified about the psychological effects of trauma and coercion. They brought in former Hartford Society members who spoke sorrowfully about poor Lena Whitmore and her decline into delusion. But they hadn't counted on Lena fighting back. She took the stand in a simple navy dress, her hair pinned severely, her hands folded in her lap. And she told the truth. I was 31 years old, unmarried, and considered a failure by my family and community. My father saw an opportunity to rid himself of an embarrassment while profiting financially. I accepted the arrangement because I believed I had no other options. Her voice was steady, clear. But when I arrived in Colorado, I discovered something unexpected. I discovered that I was capable, strong, worthy of respect based on what I could do, not who I could marry. And Mr. Rourke? The judge asked. He didn't coerce you? Mr. Rourke gave me a choice, stay or leave. He offered me freedom when my own family only offered prison. She looked directly at her father. I chose to stay. I choose to stay now, and I will fight any attempt to invalidate a marriage I entered freely and remain in freely. The courtroom erupted. Her father's lawyer objected. Eleanor Whitmore sobbed dramatically. But the judge, a stern woman in her 60s, simply banged her gavel. The case is dismissed. Mrs. Rourke's testimony is credible and compelling. The marriage stands. She looked at Robert Whitmore with obvious distaste. And Mr. Whitmore, if I were you, I'd be more concerned about the public's perception of a father who sells his daughter than a daughter who chose freedom. Lena walked out of the courthouse into chaos. Reporters shouted questions. Society matrons whispered behind gloved hands. Her mother tried to pull her aside, crying about shame and scandal. But Lena just kept walking. She had a train to catch. Back on the mountain, Caleb was slowly losing his mind. 2 weeks. 2 weeks since Lena had left, and the cabin felt wrong. Too quiet. Too empty. Everything reminded him of her. The coffee cups, the woodpile, the books she'd started reading, the marks on the barn wall where she'd practiced her shooting. He'd told himself this was what he wanted. Solitude. Peace. No complications. But it turned out that peace felt a lot like loneliness when you'd gotten used to partnership. He was splitting wood, always splitting wood, because what else was there to do? When he heard the wagon coming up the trail, his heart jumped before he could stop it. But it was just the supply wagon, early for its monthly run. The driver, a grizzled man named Pete, climbed down with a knowing grin. Got a message from Denver, came through on the telegraph line. Caleb took the paper with hands that weren't quite steady. It was from his father. Legal proceedings resolved. Marriage stands. Lena returning to Denver on next available train. Meet her if you have any sense at all. Caleb read it 3 times. She'd won. She'd fought her family and won. And she was coming back, if he wanted her to. You gonna stand there all day, or you gonna go get your wife? Pete asked, amused. Caleb looked at the cabin, at the mountain, at the life he'd built to keep everyone out. And he realized that Lena had been right about him. He'd been running, still running, 3 years after the war ended, because running was easier than risking the pain of losing something that mattered. But she mattered. Somewhere between teaching her to milk a cow and watching her split her first log, between quiet dinners and shared work, she'd become essential, and he'd let her leave without fighting for her. Pete, how fast can your wagon get to Denver? 1.5 days if we push it. Why? Because I'm an idiot who needs to fix something before it's too late. Pete laughed and started hitching fresh horses. About damn time you figured that out. Caleb grabbed his coat and rifle, old habits, and climbed into the wagon. As they rolled down the mountain, he tried to figure out what the hell he was going to say to her. Sorry I panicked? Sorry I was too scared to fight for us? Sorry I've been half dead for 3 years and forgot how to live? All of it. None of it. Whatever it took. The wagon couldn't move fast enough. Lena stepped off the train in Denver exhausted, triumphant, and terrified. She'd won the battle in Hartford. Her marriage was legally solid. Her father couldn't touch her. But she had no idea if Caleb would want her back. She'd been gone 2 weeks. 2 weeks for him to remember how much he valued his solitude. 2 weeks to decide that the complications she brought weren't worth it. She collected her trunk and stood on the platform, trying to decide her next move. Find a hotel for the night? See if Duncan could arrange transportation back up the mountain? Send a message asking if she was still welcome? Lena. She turned. Caleb stood at the edge of the platform, looking like he'd ridden hard and fast to get there. His hair was windblown, his coat was crooked, and his eyes, his storm-gray eyes, were locked on her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. Caleb. Her voice came out smaller than she'd intended. What are you doing here? He walked toward her and the crowd parted instinctively. When he stopped, he was close enough that she could see the dark circles under his eyes, the tension in his jaw. I came to tell you that I'm an idiot, he said. I could have told you that 2 weeks ago. His mouth twitched, almost a smile. You did. I didn't listen. So what changed? 2 weeks without you. He took a breath. 2 weeks of living in a cabin that felt wrong because you weren't in it. 2 weeks of splitting wood alone and cooking alone and reading alone and hating every single second of it. He paused. 2 weeks of realizing that I've been so terrified of losing something important that I forgot how to fight for anything at all. Lena's throat tightened. Caleb, you were right. I've been running. From the war, from my family, from anything that might matter enough to hurt me again. And when you showed up, I told myself it was temporary. That you were dying, or leaving, or just passing through. His voice dropped. But you weren't any of those things. You stayed. You learned. You built a life with me. And I was too scared to admit how much that meant until you were gone. What are you saying? I'm saying come home. He reached for her hand, and his touch was warm and solid and real. Come home to the mountain, to the cabin, to me. Not because you have nowhere else to go, but because you want to. Because we're building something real, and I want to fight for it. I want to fight for you. Lena looked at this man, this guarded, wounded, impossibly stubborn man who just traveled 2 days to tell her he needed her. On one condition, she said, anything. No more running, either of us. When things get hard, and they will get hard, we face it together. We fight together. She squeezed his hand. I didn't survive Hartford just to live with someone who's only half present. Deal. He pulled her closer. Lena, I don't know if I'll ever be good at this. The emotional part, the sharing and trusting and being vulnerable. But I'm willing to try, if you're willing to be patient with me. I can do patient, as long as you keep trying. I will. He lifted his free hand to her face, his touch gentle. I promise. They stood there on the platform, commuters rushing past, the November wind biting cold, and Caleb Rourke, who'd spent 3 years hiding from the world, bent down and kissed his wife properly for the first time. It wasn't the chaste brush of their wedding day. It was real and deep and full of 2 months of unsaid things finally finding voice. When they pulled apart, Lena was breathless. "So," Caleb said, his forehead resting against hers, "ready to go home?" "More than ready." He grabbed her trunk like it weighed nothing and led her to where Pete waited with the wagon, grinning like he'd known this would happen all along. As they rolled out of Denver toward the mountains, Lena leaned against Caleb's shoulder, and he wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. They'd both been broken when they met, both been lied to, manipulated, trapped in arrangements they didn't want. But somehow, from all that brokenness and deception, they'd built something true. And they were going home to keep building it, together. The journey back up the mountain took on a completely different quality than any trip before it. Where Lena's first ascent had been marked by dread and uncertainty, and her departure by heartbreak and determination, this return felt like something else entirely. It felt like coming home. Pete drove the wagon with tactful silence, occasionally glancing back at the couple huddled together against the November cold. Caleb kept his arm around Lena, and she noticed he couldn't seem to stop touching her. Her hand, her shoulder, her hair, as if reassuring himself she was real. "Tell me what happened in Hartford," he said quietly as they climbed higher into the mountains. All of it. So Lena told him about the courthouse battle, her father's lawyer, the society matrons who'd testified against her, about taking the stand and speaking her truth in front of everyone who'd ever judged her, about the judge's ruling and her father's face when he realized he'd lost. "He tried to buy me back at the courthouse steps," Lena said, almost laughing at the absurdity. "Offered me a house in Boston, a generous allowance, connections to eligible bachelors, everything except what I actually wanted. Which was? The right to choose my own life." She looked up at him. "The right to choose you." Caleb's arm tightened around her. "I'm sorry I wasn't there with you." "You're here now. That's what matters." They reached the cabin as the sun was setting, painting the snow-dusted peaks in shades of gold and rose. Smoke curled from the chimney. Caleb had banked the fire before leaving, and everything looked exactly as Lena remembered. Pete helped unload her trunk, accepted Caleb's generous payment, and made himself scarce with a knowing wink. Then they were alone, standing in the clearing as twilight descended. "Welcome home, Mrs. Rourke," Caleb said softly. "It's good to be home, Mr. Rourke." He picked up her trunk and carried it inside, and Lena followed, breathing in the familiar sense of pine smoke and coffee and the particular smell of this place that had become safety. Inside, Caleb set her trunk down and turned to face her, suddenly uncertain. "I should probably mention that I've been sleeping in the barn again. Your room upstairs is exactly as you left it. Caleb, I just wanted you to know that I'm not assuming anything. We can take this as slow as you need. I know we got married under false pretenses, and just because we've decided to make it real doesn't mean you're ready for—" Lena kissed him. It was the first time she'd initiated contact, and the surprise of it froze him for half a second before he responded, pulling her close and kissing her back with an intensity that stole her breath. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lena said, "Stop sleeping in the barn. We're married. Properly married now, by choice. And I think we've done enough pretending, don't you?" "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." She took his hand. "But Caleb, I need you to talk to me. Really talk. If we're going to build something real, I need to know you. All of you. Including the parts you've been hiding." She saw the familiar shutters start to descend, the walls going up. But this time, Caleb stopped himself, took a breath, nodded. "Not tonight," he said. "Tonight I just want to be grateful you're here. But soon, I promise." "Soon," Lena agreed. They spent the evening doing wonderfully mundane things, cooking dinner together, catching up on the work that had accumulated in Caleb's absence, tending the animals. But everything felt different now. Every brush of hands, every shared glance, every moment of companionable silence carried a new weight, an acknowledgement of possibility. When they finally went upstairs, Caleb hesitated at the bedroom door. "I can still—" "Don't you dare," Lena said, pulling him inside. That night, they shared a bed for the first time, and if their lovemaking was tentative and uncertain, two people learning each other in darkness, it was also honest, real, a sealing of the choice they'd both made. Afterward, Lena lay in Caleb's arms, listening to his heartbeat, and felt something fierce and protective bloom in her chest. This man had been so alone for so long, had convinced himself he deserved isolation. She would spend however long it took proving him wrong. The next weeks fell into a new rhythm. Winter was closing in fast, and there was urgent work to be done before the mountain became truly impassable. Caleb taught Lena the intricate preparation required for mountain winter survival, checking every seal in the cabin, reinforcing the barn roof, laying in enormous quantities of firewood, preserving every scrap of meat they could hunt or trap. "We could get snowed in for weeks at a time," Caleb explained as they worked to weatherproof the cabin's windows. "Once the big storms hit, we won't be able to get down the mountain until spring thaw. We need to be completely self-sufficient." The enormity of it was daunting, but Lena threw herself into the work with determination. She was stronger now than she'd been months ago. Her body adapted to the physical demands of mountain life, and she was discovering skills she'd never known she possessed. A knack for organization that kept their supplies meticulously inventoried, a creativity in cooking that turned limited ingredients into varied meals, an eye for detail that caught potential problems before they became emergencies. "You're good at this," Caleb said one evening as they reviewed their winter stores. "At what?" "Building, planning, making this place into something more than just survival." He gestured around the cabin, which had subtly transformed since Lena's return. She'd added small touches, curtains made from fabric she'd traded for at the settlement, dried herbs hanging in the kitchen for both cooking and medicine, a better organization system for their books. Nothing extravagant, but everything purposeful. "We're partners," Lena said simply. "Partners build together." Something shifted in Caleb's expression. He set down the inventory list and pulled her close. "I love you." The words were abrupt, almost awkward, as if they'd escaped without permission. But they were real. Lena's breath caught. "Caleb, I know I'm not good at this, the emotional stuff, but you should know. You should hear it." He touched her face gently. "I love you, Lena. I think I started loving you the day you looked at me in this cabin and said you'd rather learn to chop wood than go back to being useless." Lena felt tears prick her eyes. "I love you too. I have for weeks. I just wasn't sure if you were ready to hear it." "I'm ready." He kissed her softly. "I'm ready for all of it." The first major snowstorm hit in early December. Lena woke to an eerie silence and looked out the window to find the world transformed. Snow had fallen through the night, at least 2 feet of it, and was still coming down in thick, heavy flakes. The forest had disappeared behind a white curtain. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Caleb said from behind her, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "It's incredible. I've never seen so much snow." "This is nothing. Wait until January." He kissed the top of her head. "Come on. We need to check the animals and make sure nothing collapsed under the weight." They bundled into their warmest clothes and ventured out into the storm. The cold was shocking, stealing breath and biting exposed skin. But there was also something magical about it. The way sound was muffled, the pristine whiteness, the feeling of being the only 2 people in the world. The barn was secure, the animals safe and warm. They spent an hour mucking stalls and distributing feed, then trudged back to the cabin through knee-deep snow. Inside, Caleb built up the fire while Lena prepared breakfast. The storm showed no signs of stopping. "We'll be snowed in for a few days at least," Caleb said, coming to stand beside her at the stove. "Maybe a week." "That doesn't sound so bad." "It isn't, as long as we have enough to occupy ourselves." He pulled her against him, his hands warm on her waist. "I have some ideas." Lena laughed and swatted him playfully. "I meant books, conversation, projects." "So did I," he said innocently. Then more seriously, "Actually, there is something I've been meaning to do, if you're willing." "What's that?" "Teach you to shoot properly. Not just target practice, but real survival shooting, hunting, protection, emergency situations." He paused. "The mountain's not always safe. I need to know you can protect yourself if something happens to me." The thought of something happening to Caleb made Lena's stomach clench, but she understood. This wasn't morbidity. This was practical frontier preparation. "All right, teach me." They spent the storm days in focused intensity. Caleb was a patient but exacting instructor, drilling her on rifle mechanics, sight alignment, breathing control, trigger discipline. They practiced with empty guns inside the cabin, going through the motions until they became muscle memory. You have good instincts, Caleb said, after one particularly successful practice session. You stay calm under pressure. That's more important than raw marksmanship. I had good training in staying composed, Lena said dryly. Hartford society was excellent preparation for not showing fear. Between shooting lessons, they fell into domestic comfort. They cooked together, read aloud to each other by the fire, played chess using a set Caleb had carved himself. And slowly, carefully, Caleb began to talk. It started small. Mentions of his childhood, stories about his brothers who'd moved east, memories of his mother before grief made her fragile. Then, hesitantly, he began to speak about the war. I enlisted at 19, he said one night, staring into the fire. Thought it would be an adventure. Thought I'd be home in a few months, a hero. His laugh was bitter. I was an idiot. You were young. I was naive. He was quiet for a long moment. The first battle, I froze, completely froze. Men were dying around me, and I just stood there like a statue until my sergeant knocked me down and probably saved my life. Lena took his hand but didn't speak. She'd learned that Caleb needed silence to find his words. After that, I learned to push it down. The fear, the horror, the grief, every battle, every friend lost, every terrible thing I saw, I just packed it away and kept moving, because that's what you did. You survived. He looked at her. But when the war ended and I came home, I couldn't unpack it, couldn't process it. Everything I'd pushed down was still there, festering. Is that why you came to the mountain? Partly. But there was something else. He took a shaky breath. I was engaged before I enlisted. Sarah Mitchell. Sweet girl from a good family. We were supposed to marry when I got back. Lena's heart ached at the pain in his voice. What happened? I came back different, angry, withdrawn, prone to nightmares that made me violent in my sleep. Sarah tried to understand, but I kept pushing her away. Told myself I was protecting her from the damaged thing I'd become. His voice cracked. She broke the engagement after 6 months, said she couldn't marry a ghost, and she was right. I was already gone. Had been since Appomattox. Oh, Caleb. I heard everyone who tried to help me, my parents, my brothers, my friends. So I came up here where I couldn't hurt anyone else, where I could just exist without inflicting my damage on people I loved. He finally met her eyes. Until you. I'm not afraid of your damage, Lena said softly. You should be. Well, I'm not. Because, Caleb, you're not a ghost. You're a man who survived something terrible and is still learning how to live with it. That's not weakness. That's extraordinary strength. I still have nightmares, bad ones. I've woken up swinging at shadows. Then we'll deal with it together. You can sleep in the barn when you need to, or we'll figure out a way to make you feel safe enough to stay. She squeezed his hand. But I'm not leaving because you're wounded. We're all wounded by something. Caleb pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. How did I get so lucky? You didn't. We both just got honest. The storm eventually broke, and they dug themselves out into a world of pristine white. But something had shifted during those snowed-in days. The last walls between them had started to crumble. December passed in a blur of work and weather and deepening connection. Lena mastered the rifle, learned to track animals through snow, became proficient at identifying which frozen creeks were safe to cross. Caleb, in turn, began to relax. Not completely, but enough that his laughter came more easily, his smiles more frequently. They were building a real marriage. Not the performative kind Lena had seen in Hartford, where couples maintained separate lives and interacted mainly at social functions, but a true partnership where they worked together, fought together, healed together. In late December, they got a surprise visitor. Duncan Rourke arrived on horseback, leading a pack mule laden with packages. It was Christmas Eve, and he'd braved dangerous conditions to reach them. "Father," Caleb said, surprised and wary, "what are you doing here?" "Bringing Christmas gifts and checking on my son." Duncan's eyes went to Lena, and his expression softened. "And my daughter-in-law. You both look well, happy, even." "We are," Lena said simply. They invited Duncan inside, and over coffee and fresh bread he told them about Hartford. "Robert Whitmore is persona non grata in society now," Duncan said with obvious satisfaction. Word spread about what really happened, that he sold his daughter and then tried to void the arrangement when it didn't work out as planned. His business connections are suffering. His wife's social standing is destroyed. He paused. Your sisters have distanced themselves publicly, Lena. I'm sorry. Lena found she felt nothing. No pain, no anger, just distance. They made their choice. I made mine. A better choice, clearly. Duncan looked between them. I owe you both an apology. I manipulated this situation for my own reasons, partly to help Caleb, but also to maintain certain business connections with the Whitmore family. I used you both. I'm sorry. You're forgiven, Caleb said quietly. It worked out. Against all odds, Duncan smiled. I brought news as well. The mining operation I've been developing 15 miles from here is ready to open. We'll need supplies regularly, food, equipment, goods that can be purchased or traded from Denver. I was hoping to contract with you both to run a trading post of sorts. Base it here, serve both the mine and the smaller settlements in the area. Lena and Caleb exchanged glances. That's a significant undertaking, Caleb said slowly. It is, but you'd be compensated well, and it would give you both purpose beyond mere survival. You could build something substantial, a real business. Duncan set down his cup. Think about it. No pressure, but the opportunity is there if you want it. After Duncan left the next morning, laden with fresh game and promises to return in spring, Lena and Caleb discussed the offer. It would mean more people, Caleb said, more interaction, more everything I came up here to avoid. But not the same as before, Lena pointed out. You'd be on your own terms, building something that matters, and we'd be together. You want to do it. I think we could be good at it. We're both organized, hardworking. We understand the mountain and its challenges. And Caleb, we can't hide forever. We're not hiding anymore. We're living. This could be part of that life. He was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire. Then he turned to her with a smile that was almost mischievous. A trading post, who would have thought? Is that a yes? That's a let's think about it seriously. He pulled her into his lap. But right now, I want to focus on our first real Christmas together. They spent Christmas Day in perfect simplicity. A roasted goose Caleb had hunted, vegetables from their stores, bread Lena had baked. They exchanged modest gifts. Lena gave Caleb a warm scarf she'd knitted during the storm days, and he gave her a beautifully carved wooden box for her treasures. I made it during the 2 weeks you were gone, he admitted. Helped keep my hands busy so I wouldn't go completely insane. That night, wrapped in blankets by the fire, Lena felt a contentment she'd never experienced in all her years of Hartford Christmases with their elaborate decorations and strained family gatherings. This is perfect, she murmured. It really is, Caleb agreed, and the wonder in his voice told her he meant it. January brought the harshest weather yet. Temperatures plummeted, and the snow piled so high that the cabin windows were half buried. They lost 3 days to a blizzard so fierce that venturing outside meant genuine danger. During those days, Lena witnessed Caleb's nightmare for the first time. She woke to him thrashing beside her, making sounds of distress, his face twisted in anguish. When she touched his shoulder to wake him, he came up swinging, his hand connecting with her jaw before he fully registered where he was. Lena! He was instantly horrified, cradling her face. Did I hurt you? I'm so sorry, I didn't mean… I'm fine, she said, though her jaw throbbed. It was my fault. I shouldn't have touched you without calling your name first. This is exactly what I was afraid of. I told you. Stop. She took his shaking hands. Caleb, you were asleep. You had a nightmare. That's not the same as choosing to hurt me. But I could have… But you didn't, and now we know better. Next time I'll wake you from a distance. She pulled him close. Tell me about the dream. What were you seeing? He resisted at first, then slowly began to describe the nightmare. A battle, men dying, himself unable to save them. The words came haltingly, painfully, but they came. And when he finished, shaking and exhausted, Lena held him until his breathing steadied. Thank you, he whispered. For what? For not running. For staying even when you see the worst of me. This isn't the worst of you. This is just part of you, the part that's still healing. She kissed his forehead. We all have parts that need healing. After that night, they developed a system. When Caleb felt a nightmare coming on, he could often sense them building during the day. He'd sleep in the barn bedroom. When the night was calm, he'd stay with her. And gradually, slowly, the nightmares became less frequent. February brought a thaw, and with it, a decision. "Let's do it," Caleb said one morning over breakfast. "The trading post. Let's build something real." Lena's face lit up. "Really? Really? I've been thinking about what you said, about living instead of hiding. And you're right. We've proven we can survive up here. Now let's prove we can thrive." They spent the rest of winter planning. Caleb drew up designs for expanding the barn to include a trading post area. Lena created inventory lists and potential partnerships with Denver suppliers. They discussed what the growing mining community would need, what they could realistically provide, how to balance business with their desire for relative privacy. "We're not opening a boarding house," Caleb said firmly, "and I reserve the right to tell annoying customers to leave." "Agreed, but you have to be polite about it." "I'll try." As winter slowly released its grip and the first hints of spring appeared in the warming air and lengthening days, Lena realized something profound. A year ago, she'd been a failure in Hartford, invisible and unwanted. 6 months ago, she'd been a woman so desperate to escape that she'd agreed to marry a stranger. Now she was a partner, a wife, a businesswoman in the making. She could shoot, hunt, survive in wilderness conditions, and split wood like a lumberjack. She'd faced down her family in court and won. She'd helped a wounded man remember how to trust and love. She'd become someone she actually respected. One evening in early March, as they sat on the cabin porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of rose and gold, Caleb took her hand. "I need to tell you something," he said. Lena felt a flutter of anxiety. "What?" "I'm happy." He said it with wonder, as if surprised by his own words. "I didn't think I could be happy again, but I am, because of you." "We made each other happy," Lena corrected. "You gave me a place to be strong. I gave you a reason to try." "Partners," Caleb said. "Partners," Lena agreed. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell, and stars began to emerge in the vast mountain sky. Inside the cabin, a fire burned warm. In the barn, their animals rested secure. Around them, the mountains stood eternal and indifferent and beautiful. They'd come to this place broken and desperate, trapped by lies and arrangements they didn't want. But they'd built something true from those ashes, something that was entirely theirs. And in the spring, they'd build even more. Together. Spring arrived on the mountain like a promise kept. The snow retreated slowly, revealing earth that had been hidden for months. Streams swelled with meltwater, rushing down the mountainside in urgent cascades. The forest came alive with birdsong and the rustle of animals emerging from winter dens. And everywhere, impossibly green shoots pushed through the remaining snow, reaching for sunlight. Lena and Caleb threw themselves into the work of building their trading post with the same intensity they'd brought to winter survival. Duncan had been true to his word, sending construction materials and supplies up the mountain as soon as the trails became passable. The barn expansion began in earnest, with Caleb framing out new walls while Lena organized inventory and created the business systems they'd need. "We should name it," Lena said one afternoon as they took a break from construction. They sat on the cabin porch, sharing water and watching clouds drift across the brilliant blue sky. "Name what?" "The trading post. It needs a name, something that tells people what we're about." Caleb considered, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Mountain Haven Supply? Too generic." "Rourke's Trading Post? Boring." Lena thought for a moment. "What about Summit's Rest? It acknowledges where we are and suggests safety, respite. Summit's Rest Trading Post." Caleb tested the words. "I like it. Has a good ring to it." "Then it's decided." Lena raised her water cup in a mock toast. "To Summit's Rest. May it be everything we hope and nothing like what we fear." "I'll drink to that." The construction took most of April and May. They worked from dawn to dusk, and Lena discovered she had a talent for the organizational aspects of business. She created detailed ledgers for tracking inventory and sales, established relationships with suppliers in Denver through carefully worded letters, and developed a pricing structure that would be fair but profitable. Caleb, meanwhile, proved to have inherited his father's business acumen along with carpentry skills Lena hadn't known he possessed. The trading post addition to the barn was solid and well designed, with wide aisles for customers to browse, sturdy shelving built to last, and a counter area where they could conduct transactions and answer questions. They stocked the shelves with goods they'd purchased wholesale from Denver: tools, fabric, preserved foods, medicine, ammunition, cooking supplies, even books and newspapers for miners hungry for entertainment and news. Lena had convinced Caleb to add a small section of luxuries: candy, tobacco, writing paper, small trinkets that could be sent home to distant families. People need more than just survival goods, she'd argued. They need things that remind them they're human. "Since when did you become a business philosopher?" Caleb had teased. "Since I realized that's what you did for me. Gave me both survival skills and reasons to live." The day before their official opening, they stood in the completed trading post, surveying everything they'd built. Sunlight streamed through the windows Caleb had installed, illuminating shelves stocked with carefully arranged goods. The hand-painted sign Lena had created reading, "Summit's Rest Trading Post." The small stove in the corner that would keep the space warm come winter. "We did this," Lena said softly. "From nothing, we built this." Caleb wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "We make a good team, Mrs. Rourke." "We really do, Mr. Rourke." They opened Summit's Rest on the 1st of June, and the response exceeded their expectations. Miners from Duncan's operation came in a steady stream, grateful for a nearby source of supplies that saved them the dangerous journey to Denver. Word spread quickly, and soon they were serving a wider community: trappers, prospectors, a handful of families who'd settled in the area, even travelers passing through who needed provisions or repairs. Lena discovered she was good with customers. Her Hartford training in polite conversation served her well, though now she used it genuinely rather than as social armor. She remembered names and details, asked about families and hardships, offered advice on everything from cooking to wound care to dealing with homesickness. "You're like the settlement's unofficial counselor," Caleb observed one evening after a particularly busy day. "People just need someone to listen, really listen, without judgment." Lena was updating their ledgers, her handwriting neat and precise. "Besides, it's good for business. Happy customers become loyal customers." "My wife, the business genius." "Your wife, the woman who never got to use her brain in Hartford and is making up for lost time." Caleb laughed, and Lena marveled at how common that sound had become. The guarded, wounded man she'd married a year ago had transformed into someone who laughed easily, smiled often, and only rarely retreated behind his walls. Not that the shadows had disappeared entirely. He still had nightmares, though less frequently. He still struggled sometimes with crowds and noise. On bad days, Lena would find him in the forest, seeking the solitude that helped him recenter. But he always came back. Always talked about it eventually. And the darkness that had once threatened to consume him had become something more manageable. A part of him, yes, but not the whole of him. In July, something happened that tested them in ways they hadn't anticipated. A family arrived at Summit's Rest in obvious distress. The Johnsons, Tom, Sarah, and their 3 young children, had been traveling to join relatives in Oregon when their wagon had broken down 15 miles away. They'd limped to the mountain settlement on foot, exhausted and nearly out of supplies. "We can pay," Tom Johnson said desperately, his wife holding a feverish toddler. "We have some money saved. Please, we just need food and a place to rest before we can figure out repairs." "Of course," Lena said immediately. "Let's get you settled." She and Caleb set the family up in a small cabin that Duncan owned and rarely used, brought them food and medicine, and promised to help with wagon repairs in the morning. That night, as they prepared for bed, Caleb was quieter than usual. "What's wrong?" Lena asked. "Nothing, just thinking." "About?" He was silent for a long moment. "That could have been us. Different circumstances, but the same desperation. If things had gone differently, we could have been the ones begging strangers for help. But we weren't, and now we're in a position to help others who are desperate." Lena took his hand. "That's a gift, Caleb. Being able to be for someone else what we needed when we were at our lowest." "You're right. I see myself in Tom Johnson, the fear in his eyes when he thought we might turn them away. The relief when you said yes without hesitation." Caleb pulled her close. "You didn't even ask me. You just helped. Was that wrong?" "No, it was perfect. It's who you are." He kissed her forehead. It's one of the 1,000 reasons I love you. They helped the Johnsons get back on their feet over the next week. Caleb repaired their wagon, refusing to accept full payment. Lena made sure they had enough provisions for the rest of their journey. And when the family finally left, Sarah Johnson hugged Lena with tears in her eyes. "You saved us," she said. "We'll never forget this kindness." After they were gone, Lena found Caleb staring at the mountains, his expression thoughtful. "What if we did this more?" he said. Did what? Helped people. Really helped them, not just sold them goods. What if Summit's Rest became known as a place where travelers in trouble could find real assistance? Food, shelter, repairs, even just a friendly face. He turned to her. "We have the space, the resources, the skills, and we both know what it's like to need help and not know where to find it." Lena felt her heart swell. "You want to turn our trading post into a refuge, not instead of a business, alongside it. We can still make a profit, still build our life here. But we could also be a safety net for people who need it." He paused. "What do you think?" "I think it's brilliant. I think it's exactly what this mountain needs." She moved into his arms. "I think you're becoming the man you were always meant to be." "We're becoming the people we were meant to be," he corrected. "Together." Over the summer and into fall, Summit's Rest evolved into more than just a trading post. They became known throughout the region as people who helped. No judgment, no strings attached. They housed stranded travelers, fed hungry prospectors who'd hit rough patches, even provided temporary shelter for a woman fleeing an abusive situation until she could reach safety in Denver. Their reputation spread. Duncan visited regularly, bringing news and supplies, and one day he arrived with unexpected information. "You two are becoming famous," he said, amused. "I've heard people in Denver talking about the mountain couple who run that trading post where everyone's welcome. Some are calling you saints." "We're not saints," Lena said immediately. "Of course not. You're just good people doing good work." Duncan's expression grew serious. "But Lena, there's something else you should know. Your father died last month." The news hit like a physical blow. Lena sat down hard, trying to process feelings she couldn't quite identify. Not grief exactly, but not indifference either. "How?" she managed. "Heart failure. It was quick." Duncan paused. "Your mother sent word. She wanted you to know. She also wanted me to tell you that she understands now why you left, why you stayed away, and she's proud of what you've built here." Tears spilled down Lena's cheeks, surprising her. Caleb immediately came to her side, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "I'm all right," she said, though her voice shook. "It's just complicated." "Grief usually is," Duncan said gently, "especially for complicated relationships." After Duncan left, Lena spent the evening processing. Caleb gave her space but stayed close, a silent presence of support. "I don't know how to feel," she finally said. "He hurt me. He sold me. He tried to control my life even after I left. But he was still my father." You can feel multiple things at once. You can grieve the father he should have been while acknowledging the damage from the father he was. Caleb took her hand. "There's no right way to feel about this." "Did you grieve for the men you lost in the war, even the ones who hurt you?" "Sometimes. War's different, but yeah, I grieved for what they could have been, for the waste of it all." He was quiet for a moment. "Your father wasted a lot. His relationship with you, his reputation, his chance to know the incredible woman his daughter became. That's worth grieving." Lena leaned into him, letting his strength steady her. "Thank you." "For what?" "For knowing exactly what to say. For being here. For being you." They sat together as darkness fell, processing loss and complicated feelings, finding comfort in each other's presence. And gradually, Lena felt the grief transform into something else. Not quite acceptance, but acknowledgement. Her father was gone. That chapter of her life was closed. And she could finally, fully, move forward. Winter came again, their second together, and this time they faced it with confidence born of experience. The trading post closed for the worst months, but they kept the cabin section open for emergencies. Travelers caught in sudden storms found refuge. Miners who miscalculated their supplies found help. And through it all, Caleb and Lena deepened their partnership in ways that went beyond business or survival. They were building a legacy now, not of wealth or status, but of compassion and strength. One February evening, snowbound and cozy by the fire, Lena made an announcement. "I'm pregnant." Caleb dropped the book he'd been reading. "You're what?" "Pregnant, about 3 months along, I think." She placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "We're having a baby." The emotions that crossed Caleb's face were almost too many to count. Shock, joy, fear, wonder. "A baby. We're having a baby. Are you happy?" "Happy?" "Lena, I'm terrified and thrilled and completely unprepared." He laughed, the sound slightly manic. "A baby. Here. On this mountain." "Scared?" she asked gently. "Out of my mind. What if I'm a terrible father? What if I have a nightmare and hurt—" "Stop!" Lena took his face in her hands. "You won't. And even if you're scared, you'll figure it out. We'll figure it out together, just like we figured out everything else." "A baby," he said again, and this time his voice was full of wonder. He pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. "We're going to be parents." "We are. I love you so much." "I love you too." They spent the rest of the evening planning, talking, imagining. What would they name the child? How would they prepare the cabin? What about medical care during delivery? The questions were endless, but for every concern they found solutions. "We'll send for a midwife from Denver," Caleb decided, 2 months before your due date. "She'll stay with us until after the birth. And we'll need to expand the cabin, another bedroom. I'll start building as soon as the weather breaks." They fell asleep that night, wrapped around each other, Caleb's hand resting protectively on Lena's stomach, both of them marveling at the life growing between them. Spring arrived with its usual rush of renewal, and Caleb threw himself into cabin expansion with focused intensity. He built a beautiful nursery on the ground floor, with windows facing east to catch morning light and a small fireplace to keep it warm. Lena sewed curtains and blankets, traded for a cradle from a talented carpenter at the mine, and prepared with the same meticulous organization she brought to everything. The midwife, a capable woman named Margaret, arrived in July. She was in her 50s, had delivered hundreds of babies, and took one look at Lena and declared her healthy as a horse and twice as stubborn. "Good," Margaret said. "Stubborn women have easier births. They're too determined to quit." In late August, on a clear evening with the mountains painted gold by setting sun, Lena went into labor. It was long and difficult and painful in ways nothing in her life had prepared her for. But through it all, Caleb stayed by her side, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, murmuring encouragement and love. "You can do this," he said during the worst of it. "You're the strongest person I know. You survived Hartford, survived this mountain, survived me. You can survive this." "Not helping," Lena gasped between contractions. "Sorry, I'll shut up now." "Don't you dare! Keep talking. Distract me." So he talked. About the first time he saw her step off the wagon, how terrified he'd been. About watching her learn to split wood and thinking she'd give up within an hour. About the moment he realized he loved her, standing in that Denver train station, finally understanding what he'd been too scared to see. And then, as dawn broke over the mountains, their daughter was born. She was perfect, tiny and red-faced and screaming with impressive lung power. Margaret cleaned her and wrapped her and placed her in Lena's arms, and both parents stared in absolute wonder. "She's beautiful," Caleb whispered, touching one impossibly small hand with his calloused finger. The baby gripped it instinctively, and his eyes filled with tears. "What should we name her?" Lena asked. They'd discussed many names over the months, but never settled on one. Now, looking at their daughter in the golden morning light, Caleb said, "Hope. We should name her Hope. Hope Rourke." Lena tested the name. "It's perfect, because that's what she is. Our hope. Our proof that broken people can build something beautiful." "Hope Elizabeth Rourke," Caleb added, touching his daughter's cheek with infinite gentleness. "Elizabeth for your grandmother, is that all right?" Lena nodded, too emotional to speak. They stayed like that for a long time. The three of them cocooned in the quiet nursery while the mountain woke around them. A family. Built from lies and desperation and impossible choices, but real. More real than anything either of them had known before. The years that followed were full and rich and occasionally chaotic. Hope grew from infant to toddler to a fierce little girl who loved the mountains and animals, and her parents with equal intensity. Summit's Rest thrived, becoming a cornerstone of the mountain community. Caleb's nightmares became rare, then almost non-existent. Lena's confidence bloomed into full-fledged expertise in business and mountain survival. They faced challenges, of course. A bad winter when supplies ran dangerously low, a forest fire that came too close to their property, the occasional difficult customer or dangerous situation that required all their skills to resolve. But they faced it all together. Duncan visited regularly, bringing news of the outside world and watching with obvious pride as his granddaughter grew. Eleanor Whitmore wrote letters, tentative at first, then more frequent, seeking connection with the daughter she'd failed to protect and the granddaughter she'd never met. Eventually, she made the journey west, and the reconciliation between mother and daughter was tearful and incomplete, but genuine. "I was weak," Eleanor said, holding Hope in her arms while Lena watched carefully. "I should have fought for you. Instead, I let your father control everything. I'll regret that until I die." "You're here now," Lena said. "That's what matters." Other children followed Hope, first a son they named Daniel, then another daughter called Margaret, after the midwife who'd become a dear friend. The cabin expanded to accommodate the growing family, and Summit's Rest became a true community center, hosting occasional gatherings and celebrations. One evening, when Hope was 5 and full of questions about everything, she asked her parents about how they met. "Did you love each other right away?" Hope asked, nestled between them on the sofa. Caleb and Lena exchanged glances, entire conversations passing in a look. "No," Lena said honestly. "We didn't love each other right away. We didn't even know each other." "Then how did you fall in love?" "We worked together," Caleb said. "We learned together. We figured out how to be partners before we figured out how to be in love." "And sometimes," Lena added, "that's the best kind of love. The kind you build, piece by piece, choice by choice." Hope considered this with the seriousness of childhood. "Like how you built our house." "Exactly like that," Caleb said, smiling. "One log at a time, one nail at a time, until suddenly you have something strong enough to withstand any storm." "I'm going to build that kind of love when I grow up," Hope declared. "I hope you do, sweetheart," Lena said, pulling her daughter close. "I hope you build exactly the life you want, without anyone else telling you what it should look like." After Hope had been put to bed, Caleb and Lena stood on the porch, looking out at the moonlit mountains. 10 years had passed since that first terrified meeting. 10 years of building and struggling and healing and growing. "Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if you'd never come here?" Caleb asked. "Sometimes. I probably would have stayed in Hartford, unmarried and unhappy, slowly turning into a bitter old spinster." Lena leaned into him. "What about you?" "I'd still be alone on this mountain, convinced I was better off isolated, probably drinking too much, and definitely not living." He wrapped his arms around her. "We saved each other." "We did. Two broken people who had no business being together, building the strongest marriage I've ever seen. You think it's strong?" "I know it is, because we chose it. Every day we choose each other. That's stronger than any arrangement based on attraction or convenience or social expectations." They stood in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of their mountain home. Inside, their children slept safe and warm. Around them, a community they'd helped build went about their lives. And somewhere in Hartford and Denver and settlements across the territory, people told stories about the mountain couple who'd turned rejection into refuge. "Thank you," Caleb said suddenly. "For what?" "For staying that first week. For choosing me when you had every reason to leave. For being patient while I learned how to love again." He turned her to face him. "For giving me a life I never thought I deserved." "You deserved it all along. You just needed someone to show you." Lena touched his face gently. "And thank you for seeing me. Really seeing me when everyone else just saw a failure. Thank you for giving me space to become who I was always meant to be." "Partners," Caleb said. "Always." They kissed in the moonlight, two people who'd been thrown together by lies and desperation, who'd built truth and strength from nothing, who'd transformed the harshest frontier into home. Years later, when Hope was grown and building her own life, she would tell people about her parents, about the woman from Hartford who learned to survive on a mountain and the soldier who learned to live again. about the trading post that became a refuge, and the love that was built one choice at a time. She would tell people that her parents had taught her the most important lesson anyone could learn, that where you start doesn't determine where you end, that broken things can be mended, that the worst circumstances can lead to the best outcomes if you're brave enough to choose differently than everyone expects. And she would tell people that true love isn't finding someone perfect, it's finding someone perfectly willing to build something real with you, one difficult, beautiful day at a time. But on this particular evening, Hope was still a child, sleeping peacefully in a house built by love and determination. And her parents stood on their porch, looking at mountains that had witnessed their transformation, grateful beyond words for the lies that had brought them together and the truth they'd built from those ashes. They'd been sold, manipulated, trapped by families that saw them as problems to be solved. Instead, they'd become each other's solution. Two outcasts who'd found belonging, two broken people who'd become whole, two strangers who'd become soulmates through sheer determination and daily choice. Their story would live on in the mountain communities they'd served, in the children they'd raised, in every person who'd found refuge at Summit's Rest when they needed it most. But for now, they simply stood together, watching stars emerge one by one in the vast Colorado sky, content in the knowledge that they'd built something that would outlast them both. A legacy of strength, of compassion, of two people who'd refused to accept the lives they'd been given and had dared to build something better, together. And that was more than enough. That was everything.